it would seem to me that if you knew where you wanted the Army to go in the next 20 years, and recognizing it's not a perfect world, things are going to change, but you got an azimuth out there that you can work to, then you then have an opportunity, I think, to do something that frankly we've never done very well, and that's an officer corps strategy. I mean, a real strategy. We've talked a lot about leader development, how do you develop leaders and next leaders and so forth, but we never really had and I don't think a coherent officer corps strategy that was driven by the strategic view we have of where you want to position the Army 20 years from now. I think one of the toughest challenges we have is making sure that we're bringing the right folks in to the officer corps. I just use the analogy in the business world. If we make a bad hire in a leadership position, it cost us probably 2 years in terms of finding out we made a bad hire, trying to mentor and coach the bad hire to improve, then finally having to replace the bad hire, bring somebody else in and start the process all over. It's not much different in the military. If you bring in an individual who doesn't have all the right qualities, then you spend a great deal of time with that individual before you realize that you made a mistake. Over 95% of what we did in the Army, developing as a leader in the Army over the years, is transferable to the private sector. Being a leader, being a manager, being a trainer, being a role model are the same in industry they were in the Army. We had to learn contracting and had to learn the finance business, but the business of a vision for the organization as a leader, developing the strategic plan for the leader, developing the people, making sure you have the quality people who have the highest ethical standards, and treating your people with dignity and respect are the same in industry as they were in the Army. I'm a big supporter of sending officers out to non-Army positions for short periods of time, whether it's a think tank, whether it's training with industry, whether it's a fellowship, for the following reasons. One, the officer becomes much broader in his views of the world, particularly in a situation where an officer has not done anything outside the Army other than Army-related positions, Army-related schools. He or she will greatly broaden themselves just by the association, whether it's taking academic courses, whether it's sitting in on lectures, whether it's going to Capitol Hill and working as a legislative liaison assistant and so forth. As we look at the strategic view of the Army, and as we start talking about the development of the officer corps strategy, you got to look at that in context of resources. And when we have the resourcing of the officer corps in a overhead account, that normally becomes the first that gets hit. And what we need to make sure is we're protecting the resources necessary to execute the officer corps strategy, because you can't have a strategy that you don't resource. Now, some have raised the issue of why we're not having more of our Army senior officers, generals in key combatant positions, key joint positions, joint commands. That is something that is determined by the senior leadership, civilian leadership of the Defense Department, and that's something that we can't predict. What we can predict is how we develop officers so they become senior flag rank, that they can compete for those positions. Whether they're selected or not is a different story, but we can make sure that our strategy is such that we develop them in all the skills they need, both within the Army and in the joint arena, in terms of skills, assignments, education, and training, so that they can compete for those positions. I would say that one of the major advantages of a strategy that I've been talking about, is to ensure that the Army can adapt to whatever changes are necessary within the officer corps. Without any kind of a strategy, to me, it's hard to adapt. And to do away with dealing with just individual functions, an overarching strategy that allows us to adapt, whether we're fighting a war, whether we're having a period of peace, whether we have a Goldwater Nichols that we got to respond to. If you got a strategy that's driving the program here, then you can adapt to a lot of outside influences that we know are going to happen to us over the next 20 years. I think that we're going to be in the so-called protracted war for a long time, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, or where it may be. And I think it is putting stress on the officer corps, and to put stress on the officer corps strategy. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we can't spend all of our time in terms of the leadership on today's fight. If we do that, we do it to the peril of the Army of the future.